Hi, everybody. It's good to see you again. I'm really happy that you're here. I'm so glad that you're taking the time out to spend with me. Tonight, we're going to go and talk all about cognitive distortions. And I got to be really honest with you. It took an entire semester in my master's class to learn all these. So I picked 5, and I don't know if that was a bold move of me deciding I could take on 5 tonight, or if it was manageable. So we're going to kind of ebb and flow in between what we can do versus what we can't do. These are really, they're not something that's just quickly learned and managed. It's really easy to understand what they are very quickly, but it's not easy to constantly implement and make changes to them. So I have a couple ideas for tonight. And the first thing that I want to drop to you guys so that you can have it, and for anybody that likes taking notes and likes being aware of stuff, here are the 5 that I've picked for us to go through tonight. So that way, if you want to just kind of keep along or you want to take notes while we're doing it, you have 5 that are all laid out for you. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Nichole Coyne. I am a licensed psychotherapist here in Florida. I own a group therapy practice, as well as being a coach and consultant for high achievers and perfectionists to help you overcome high functioning anxiety, imposter syndrome, burnout, and help you start living in your life rather than running through it. There is something I kind of want to chat with you guys about too before I jump right into the content. One of the biggest reasons that I love hosting these webinars and doing this is to help for promoting some of my other services that I offer. If you've enjoyed the series, the sequence, these webinars, any types of my education or teaching, please reach out to me. I have 2 offers going on right now. One is my Perfectionist Reset course. So if this is the type of material that you find really helpful, my entire course is video recorded. It has tons of resources, and it can be purchased on your own, and it's a self-driven course that goes on for 6 weeks. If you feel like that might be really good for you, but you may not be able to pay full attention to it, you need some accountability with it, that's okay. That's where group coaching comes in. So we do Perfectionist Reset 2.0. This is our group coaching, and what this looks like is a small group of high-achieving perfectionist individuals that come together week by week for 6 whole weeks. We go through the material that you get in the course, and you get an interactive journal with that, as well as a free one-to-one session, well, an included one-to-one session with me right smack dab in the middle of those 6 weeks. If you or anybody you know is interested, book a strategy call with me. You can go on Instagram, find the link in bio. I will have, maybe Amy can drop the link in the chat for me too. Just book a call with me. It's an hour free. Why not? We can chat. We can see what some of the things are that you want to start managing. You want to navigate a little bit better. It's free and it's an hour, right? So if there's also anything throughout these webinars that you've been interested in diving into a little bit more, please reach out to me, right? I offer these strategy calls for all different kinds of things. There's no obligation required. I don't commit you to anything. We really just talk it out, and it's not a sales call. I just want to make that really clear that I don't sell you anything, and we just kind of talk about your needs. Let's jump into cognitive distortions. So what is a cognitive distortion, and really what are we talking about here? I'm going to break this word down for you guys just so that it's really, really easy to understand, because these are kind of just fancy words. Cognitive or cognition literally means thinking, okay? So whenever you hear that word, whenever you hear of like cognitive coach or cognitive behavioral therapy, anything like that. So this is all based on thinking. Distortion, a little bit harder to totally define, and I'm not a Webster dictionary, but think of being distorted in some way, being altered, being negative. Cognitive distortions are also considered cognitive biases. These actually come from societal influences, parents, they're passed along. They're really, 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 really common in society with the way in which we interact with our world and the way in which we see our own selves within our world, right? And what ends up happening is we start picking up on some of these cognitive distortions and we run with them. And perfectionists and high achievers are very, very, very guilty of this. Like I said before, it took me an entire semester to learn these in my master's program. I do not expect you to walk away knowing all of the details of each one of these distortions. This is only 5 of the distortions. There's a lot more than that. Take your time with learning this. Take your time with recognizing it. Take away the big points that I'm giving you today. If you and your partner are here tonight, thank you so much for coming, because this will be really helpful for you and your partner to communicate about and really bring awareness to some situations that seem to occur over and over and over again without you guys knowing how to get out of it. I'm going to make sure that I add examples related to being in a relationship or being with partner, and even think about this with your best friend. One of the things I was kind of kicking myself for earlier today was, as I was gauging in a cognitive distortion, was during my inner critic presentation, the one thing that I didn't bring up was having an inner critic ally. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more today because it's going to be very helpful for the way that you manage and kind of break down some of these distortions. But that ally is that person, right? And it's the reason I've asked you to bring your partners. It's that person that really can help you to overcome this without adding to it, right? Without adding to that distortion. And an ally can be a best friend, it can be a super close coworker, it can be a partner, it can be a relative, it can be somebody that just helps you to see things a little bit differently without constantly comparing their own needs or difficulties. So there's the pretense of that. Here's your first distortion. The first distortion is that of catastrophizing or catastrophic thinking. This is one that perfectionists are very, very, very guilty of. It's one that type A's are very, very guilty of. And the reason being is that we're constantly looking forward, right? So this distortion really is looking for every single time the worst case scenario. And if I honestly, if I had $1 every time I asked somebody that, right? Like, what is the worst case scenario here? What are you thinking? Where is this coming from? Because this is what's really perpetuating a lot of the anxiety, whether we recognize this is coming out or this is the main thing that we're thinking about all the time. Think of this as what if. Every time you get in a car, anytime you're going to go on a roller coaster, anytime that you're about to present or you're doing a big project for work or you're having a meeting with your boss, this is that what if. Catastrophic thinking looks like us putting a lot of pressure on the things that we don't necessarily have evidence to support that could happen, right? It's a protective measure that our brain uses sometimes too, because it's like, well, let me prepare myself for the worst case scenario to happen. The reality is what we amplify in our brains is typically a lot more significant than what the possibility actually is, okay? This is the exaggeration or the minimization of the importance of what's going on, right? So we're constantly thinking of, if I don't get an A on this exam, I'm done. Like I see medical students do this a lot. And that's the example I'm immediately thinking of, right? Is that some of the med students that I work with in therapy or in coaching, they'll bomb a test. They'll do really not well on a test. And they'll come to me and they're like, I can never be a doctor. And I'm like, what? Like, what? Come again? Like, tell me that again, because just because you failed one exam doesn't make it so that you can't become a physician, right? Like, obviously you need to pass your boards and certain things like that. But this one exam in microbiology or microchemistry or something along those lines doesn't necessarily mean that this is what will happen. Use that example when thinking about catastrophic thinking. What if you never get the job? What if something bad happens? This distortion also relates highly to trauma that we've experienced within our lives. People that have experienced pretty significant traumas in their lives or have had sudden or unexpected events happen constantly think in catastrophic thinking. So what do we do about it? This is the first mindset shift that I want you guys to be really aware of with with catastrophic thinking. Be careful of the what if questions, right? This is really where that anxiety starts to prickle up. And as soon as we can start to acknowledge and become really aware of what's happening within this what if moment, we can step back from it. This is when I tell my clients a lot of times, quit focusing on each one of the trees and zoom out to the forest, right? It's not that we're focusing on which tree comes next. It's that we're really trying to get the understanding of how do we get through this path. And if we go into this situation thinking that the worst case is going to happen, it's not going to help you prepare better for not the worst case happening, for just it going the way that it's supposed to go. Amplifying a catastrophic thought is really doing a big disservice for you. The other really important thing with catastrophic thinking that I cannot preach enough, and I know I'm a therapist, so I recognize that this isn't going to be in everybody's wheelhouse, mindfulness. I will tell you guys every time before a presentation, before I do any event that's live, I blast music for probably 15 minutes beforehand. And I just kind of get myself into a zone of being able to be present with you. This is my version of mindfulness. It doesn't have to be necessarily a meditation, but really setting it myself up to be in that really excited place that I want to show up with you. This is that part where I can reduce all of these other things from happening. If I keep going into a presentation or a webinar or anything along those lines, and I keep thinking, oh, the worst case scenario is going to happen and the power is going to go out, we're going to lose internet. Someone knock on some more wood for me. I'm not going to feel really good coming into it. I need to get myself into a really good spot. As soon as I start to notice, and I want you to think back to the monger when we talked about the inner critic with the monger, as soon as you start to notice that your brain is going into that catastrophic thinking, I want you to start finding a way to be present with where you are and not over driving, not going past that temporal boundary, right? This boundary that we've created, to start exaggerating something. If you need help, especially within relationships, use your ally, use your partner, use your best friend, use somebody. Because a lot of the times, and I even do this with my family, I'm like, what do you think the worst case scenario is going to happen when I notice somebody's having a lot of anxiety? And they'll give me this situation and I'll really look at them and I'll be like, how probable is that? Right? I do this to patients, I do this to everybody. But I'm like, how probable is that really to happen that way? And they'll kind of sit back and be like, I guess it's not. And I'm like, okay, then why are we feeding that? Because the more we feed it, the more we amplify it, the more we start to believe it. In relationships, a lot of the times when we have an argument with our spouse or our partner, we can go into catastrophic thinking. And we're going to talk, this is going to lean right into the next distortion too, that of polarized thinking. We have this argument with our partner and we start thinking the worst case scenario. Like, what does it look like when we break up? What does it look like if we're not together? What does it look like if this happens? What does it look like if they end it with me? We start going into that catastrophic thinking. That's not really helpful in an argument, right? That just leaves people into this idea of what is called polarized thinking, which is number 2 of our distortion. I can't believe that worked out so well. Okay, so number 2 of polarized thinking, really quick, just to recap, start managing the what if questions, the catastrophic thinking, use your ally, practice mindfulness and being present, okay? Just utilizing those with catastrophic thinking. Polarized thinking. This is when we think of things in an all or nothing framework. I either go on the trip or I don't go on the trip. It's either black or it's white. Honestly, I don't like this example, but think a little bit more of politics, right? Like we're either right or we're either left. There's no gray in between. This is the problem with polarized thinking a lot of the times, is that, and I see my coaching clients and my therapy clients do this so much, is where they get themselves so in this fixated state of like, I'm either doing the thing or I'm a complete failure. I'm either a perfectionist and I'm overachieving and this is who I am and this is how I show up, or I'm failing in every essence of the manner. That's not true. You're not just winning or losing, right? But this is how perfectionists really see a lot of their life, is that if I'm not being productive, if I'm not producing, I'm failing. That's not true, folks. Polarized thinking in relationships, this is a good example for you guys to hold on to. It can often look like giving ultimatums or only giving 2 options. And the problem with this is that there's a lot of ways to load the dishwasher, okay? There's the way that you like the dishwasher being loaded, but honestly, if your partner loaded it and the dishes are clean and everything is good and it's done, what does it matter? Like, it's over. They can put those dishes away, everything is good. Think about too, what's for dinner? We're only gonna have Mexican or we're only gonna have Italian. Why are those the only 2 options if there's other 7 restaurants open within the neighborhood, right? Start paying attention to the ways in which polarized thinking is showing up within your life as well as within your relationship. Sometimes we pigeonhole ourselves into this belief that it has to be this way or it has to be another way. When the reality is there's a lot of different options. There's a lot of different choices. This can also look like when we're working in a workout plan and we miss a workout. Oh, you know what it is? Have you guys heard of this workout 75 hard? Anybody heard of this? This is basically the workout plan that I'm going to say it a little bit wrong, I'm sure, but you have to go 75 days, no alcohol, no cheat meals, no sweets. What else is included? Can't miss a workout. You have to drink 1 liter of water a day. I'm sure there's a lot more elements to this workout plan that I don't know about. But once I first heard about it, actually one of my clients brought it up to me, and they first brought it up to me. And I was like, this sounds like polarized thinking, right? If you miss a day, you have to start all the way back from square one. It's not hugely sustainable for our life. What happens if you get sick in the middle of this, right? Where's the self-compassion here? Like, how are you supposed to live your life and enjoy certain things and have an area for you to find balance in, if you're constantly setting this expectation, this bar really, really, really high. Basically, when you get off track, you assume that you have to do everything in your power to pull this all back together. That's not super helpful every single time. If you have a cheat meal once in a while, it doesn't mean that you're going to gain 30 pounds, right? That's the catastrophic thinking coming back out, right? Like, oh, I have to punish myself. I have to shame myself. No, like you're allowed to have a cheat meal, or you're allowed to have dessert or a glass of wine at dinner. It's just that we can't look at it all one way or all the other way. In physical fitness, a lot of the times too, we get really stuck with food, physical training, and the way in which we're showing up in that space, because we think that if we only do it in this one container, this is the only way that it'll be successful. And unfortunately, that's what we think a lot of other people do. Fixating on certain things isn't helping you, especially with polarized thinking. So let's go through some of the mindset shifts. First, we have to come in to acknowledge that some of the gray exists. And what I mean by this, there is room for another option to exist. Okay. There's more than Mexican and Italian food. In relationships, a lot of the times when we get stuck in this thinking of it has to be right my way or it has to be right their way, and those are the only two ways, you're not actually working on the problem here. One of the best pieces of advice I ever have learned or understood with relationships too is it is not you against your partner and your partner against you with a problem. It's you and your partner against a problem, right? And as soon as you can start to pull away and start to understand, we need to make a plan, we need to make a decision for dinner, right? And it doesn't need to be an argument. As soon as you can start to pull away from that and go, how can we come together on this to come up with that solution? You move away from polarized thinking. You move away from catastrophic thinking, and you move away from this idea that you're fighting against each other to be right, which really can cause a lot of disruption when you're always going back and forth at each other with that, especially for perfectionists. Perfectionists have a tendency where they do like to be right. They don't want to be wrong a lot of the times. There's nothing wrong with that until it starts putting you into some of these other areas of distorted thinking where now you can't see the other options. You can't see the gray. And you can't really enjoy a lot of those pieces of your world and your life in different ways. That's where a lot more of that, being mindful of it, recognizing when it comes up. One of the things that I really like to do is when I notice that I'm in a polarized thinking pattern is I'll reach out to a close friend or my inner critic ally or my husband or someone, and I'll be like, what's the other option here that I'm not seeing, right? Like, what's the other thing that I can do? And a lot of the times, if I just let a problem sit for long enough, I can collect more data to be able to deal with, manage, and assume whatever next step is going to be the best for me. Maybe the next step was doing nothing in that moment. All right, let's talk about overgeneralization. Overgeneralization, I have a really good example of this. This will be a really helpful way to remember it. I'm going to assume that you guys are going to go grocery shopping with me. Okay. So one of you is coming, all of you are coming grocery shopping with me. And we're going to the checkout line, and there's a mother and a child there, right? And let's say the child is somewhere in between the age of like 4 to 6.5, right? And the child wants a candy bar. And we're all watching this, right? Like, we're just observers behind this mother and this child. And the mom's like, listen, we got goldfish in here. We got little bites. We got all these different candies. We got your favorite pizza for later. We got all these different things in here. We're not getting the Hershey's bar. And the kid goes, you never let me have this. That's overgeneralization, right? Using the words always, never, everything, or nothing. Sorry, there's 4. Always, never, everything, nothing. That little kid is literally engaging in this distortion of overgeneralization because they are making this huge generalization about something that isn't necessarily true. And this is a really easy example to understand this distortion in a little bit of a different way. The way we do it as adults a lot of the times looks different, right? This looks like, I'm never going to be able to figure out this next problem. I had a conversation with somebody one time, and they had started a new job. And they said, I wish I was at the part of the job where I knew all of the things that I'm learning right now. And I was like, why? me, right? I'm like, why? And they're like, well, then I wouldn't be so in that like middle space of just starting to learn everything. Because right now I feel like I never know anything. I never know the answer. I'm always like struggling with figuring out the next step. And I was like, right, but then as soon as you know everything, you become the person that everybody's dependent on for knowing everything. And she kind of like looked at me and I was like, okay, so can we just be present with where you are in this situation and recognize that it's sometimes annoying learning new things, but also sometimes really empowering. And this is where we can start to break some of this overgeneralization. Getting a lower grade on an exam or not doing so well on a project and then assuming that we're a failure. This is a really big tendency of perfectionists, right? If I didn't get 120%, even out of 100%, then I'm failing it in some way. I'm never going to be able to do that next move. I'm never going to be able to level up. One of the things I absolutely love about both sides of my profession and spending time with people is that I love when I'm having a conversation with somebody and they're like, oh, I can never do that. And I'm like, you could do anything that you really want to do. And I don't mean to be like that, like parent. It's like, be an astronaut. But I mean it in the way of you're literally boxing yourself off in this category by utilizing overgeneralization to assume that you can't do whatever next step you want. Nothing is completely out of your reach. Sure, there's some things, right? For instance, I probably won't be an astronaut. I'm not really big into heights. I probably won't do a lot of these different things. That doesn't mean, though, that I'm never going to be able to do some of the other goals that I really want to accomplish in my life. And we have to really pull away from this distortion. This is the other one, too, of I do everything wrong. Everybody always takes advantage of me. This is another way that this distortion shows up a lot of the times. And a lot of the times, I'll be very honest with you, when my perfectionists come and book a strategy call with me, we start talking, I hear this distortion come out, right? They're feeling very invalidated. They're feeling very resentful, and resentment comes from envy about all the things that they're doing and not getting any real relief from or satisfaction from that it's being completed, right? And when we start to actually break this down, it turns into typically a little bit of a bigger issue, a different type of distortion, as well as a different core belief. And that core belief is often, I'll just cheat and tell you guys, it's often, I am not enough, right? I'm not enough in some capacity. And so we fall into this overgeneralization because we start to assume that the only way that we can fix this is by to keep doing. It's not true. Okay, this distortion, I'm going to read this. This distortion can also play a lot into relationships, assuming and maintaining that when something bad happens, it means it can never go well again and feeling alone and isolated. Think about a hard time that you have had in your relationship with your partner or with a best friend, right? With a colleague, with someone. When we get stuck in this overgeneralization distortion, we start to assume that there's never going to be a way to overcome, come back, or reconcile from this event. That's not helpful. It's not true. This distortion really turns us into that pattern of like isolated and feeling very alone in what we're experiencing. Utilizing your ally to come to them and say, hey, this is where I'm actually at right now, or using your partner and being like, I am doing this distortion, and I think that forever we're going to have this exact same argument and we're never going to come up with a resolution for it. Help them, right? Communicate that. Because remember, it's not the two of you against each other. It's the two of you with an issue that you have to find a resolve for. All right, let's do the mental shifts. Obviously, start reducing these words right off the bat. Before you guys start to notice these distortions within yourself, you're going to start noticing it within other people. It's like the inner critic, right? It's a little bit easier to kind of pick up on others than it is necessarily from our own place. But what you'll start to notice is that just when you're paying attention to these words, you're starting to go, should I really use the word always? Like, does it always fail? Do I never make cakes right? Is everything always hard? And I see a lot of people, that's because we are perfect, that's right. I see a lot of people get themselves stuck in this area, in this realm, in this notion where all they're saying is this distortion of overgeneralization. Like, this is how it has to always be. When you start to notice that they're coming up for you, ask yourself, is it really never, always, and everything? So this is a sentence. Or is it one situation that I'm feeling the intensity of responsibility that I feel with this? Decide if this is an unreasonable statement and if it's not helpful. You can go back on these words, guys. Like, you don't have to, this doesn't have to be the definite, the end, the period, the ending of everything you're ever going to say. Like, you can go back and be like, hey, I kind of over exaggerated that, or I shouldn't have said always. What I meant was blank. We'll notice this in arguments, right? You always, same thing with the little kid wanting the Hershey bar. Pay attention to how this is showing up. Should statements. Where my perfectionist at? I love this one. And not in the way of that I want to cuddle up with it, in the way that I can relate to this one on a daily basis that I have to manage. And I will be very vulnerable and tell you that. I have no problem. This is what you think you should or ought to do. And every single day, part of the reason, remember the productivity presentation in the webinar? Part of the reason that I gave you all those different tools is so that you quit shoulding yourself to death, okay? Shoulding and putting should on everything makes you feel like you're not getting absolutely anything done in your life. Makes you feel like you're constantly pushing that finish line. This also for my coaching clients that are in this presentation or people that have done some of my course, this is also really relevant too with other oriented perfectionism, right? Because we think they should be doing this, right? Like our assumption is that that person should be taking care of this thing in this way, right? We're all guilty of this. We're all guilty of all these distortions, by the way. Nobody is perfect. These are just the ones that I work with the most with my clients and that I also personally have to manage pretty often. I want you to think too, this one promotes a lot of guilt and shame. I was recently talking to somebody and we were having a conversation about the scheduling within the week, right? So remember like heavy loading in the front versus making sure your schedule has a little bit more management throughout the week. And their assumption was I should get as much done as I possibly can in the beginning of the week. Distortion of should statements, right? And I was like, I said, why? Why are you killing yourself on Monday into running out of all this energy? And their belief system was, if I get more of these things done early, I won't have other things to do. But what we ended up being able to negotiate down to was basically this idea that regardless of what you get done on Monday, there's another task that follows it, especially if you're a business owner, entrepreneur, you're in charge of a lot of different things in your interpersonal life, especially in those case scenarios, right? Just because you worked really hard on Monday doesn't mean that you'll be able to just chill out by Thursday. Why not pace yourself? Same with shoulding. I should go to the gym. I should eat better, right? This alteration, the mindset change that has to start happening here is that we have to lower that monger, but we also have to shift the way in which we are thinking as ourselves that we should show up in this heightened expectation that's unrealistic. Doesn't always necessarily work out that way, right? Another big one, and going back to that other oriented perfectionism, right, is they ought to know that I don't like it when they're late. They should know that I don't like it when they don't come with snacks, right? When we put this on other people, a lot of times, especially our partner, we set our partner to the same level of expectation. Not for nothing, but you don't love shoulding yourself and saying, I should have eaten better. I should have gone to the gym longer. I should have done this. I should have not had that brownie or whatever. Why would you put that on your partner? It can make a huge difference in a relationship to kind of just settle down with the shoulds and say, would you like to, or are you at a place to be able to, right? When we should our partner too much, or we shoulding ourselves, well, when we're shoulding our partner too much, it's basically us projecting those things onto our partner a lot of times, just the therapist part of that side, right? Like, what is it that you think you need to be doing more of that you're projecting onto your partner? But the other side of that too is what happens when you don't? And now that you're here, is there something different that you can do rather than criticizing yourself? If you have a loud monger, friends, if that inner critic part, that monger is loud, the shoulding lives in your headspace all of the time. So here are some of the mindset shifts. Number one, lowering the monger, reducing the need to put pressure on yourself and others when it is not necessary or helpful. We're guilty of this. We're humans. We always think that we need to be kind of moving towards this next step and we should be doing something differently. And the reality is sometimes we should just work on being who we are and being in that present mindful moment of, yeah, I could have done that, but I couldn't make that happen today. So if I should myself, I criticize myself. If I criticize myself, I just make myself feel shame and guilt. But why are you going to perpetuate that onto yourself right now? Reduce the expectation of needing to be at a specific space mentally or emotionally with something. Oh, yeah. All right, let's talk about this really quickly in terms of interpersonal work that you do, whether it's related to therapy or coaching. We don't give enough value to how heavy that work is. One of the things that, so as a therapist, I'm my own therapist. And one of the things that I have to do with my own therapy is not book anything, not communicate with anyone an hour after my therapy. It is a boundary that I've set with myself, regardless of how the session goes. I cannot meet with my therapist and then be a therapist in the next hour, right? Although that may seem like interesting to some people, it's really a necessity. Because the work that I'm doing, the emotional, mental labor that I'm doing in there is so oppositional to who I am as a provider and how I show up in that space for other people. I have to be really cognizant and really self-aware of these different things. Also, I can't expect for myself that I should show up perfectly every single time in what I do. And any one of my coaching clients that's here or that has ever worked with me will tell you, I laugh at a lot of my imperfections, but I also call them out pretty regularly. And a lot of that is because I recognize that it's never perfect. And I have to come into this idea that I could should myself to death on some of these things, or I could show up imperfectly while I'm working on the goal of trying to help others. And this is how I start to lower that expectation. If you have some boundaries and expectations that you also need to set with shoulding yourself, start doing it. The number one way that you can immediately start taking action on this too, guys, is journaling. I know it is not everybody's cup of tea, but so many of these distortions will start popping up and then you'll be able to see, oh, Nichole kind of taught me about that. And she said, this isn't worth putting that much energy and effort into because I'm just guilting and shaming myself. It will flip the way your brain thinks. You will have a different perspective of how it is showing up. So let's go to this one, which is discounting the positive. Hi, perfectionists again. This is the one that looks like they're just doing it because. When I work with somebody who has a social anxiety or like a panic disorder type thing going on, one of the things I like to do is I like to do a little bit of this like ego work where I have them pretend with me for a second that we're sitting in a mall and that people are walking by. And I have them call out the things that they notice about the people, right? And typically when we start sitting in this exercise for a few minutes, they're saying like, oh, that guy's wearing a yellow shirt, or that lady has some cool, expensive boots on, or look at that mohawk that person has on, right? We're just imagining this in our minds, right? But what's happening here is we're picking up on these little pieces, but we're not going too deep into anybody's like interpersonal lives, right? We're not writing scripts. And sometimes you guys can have fun with this every once in a while. I've seen people do this before, but like sit and they'll be at a park and they'll like start making up a storyline for people, right? Which is fine, but it doesn't mean it's the truth. You know, maybe that guy isn't a 5-star chef that's sitting in the middle of Boston Commons, right? We want him to be, but he's probably not. What's happening here, though, a lot of the times is that we make assumptions on people just based on appearance and the way that they hold themselves and the ways that they do different things. What I want you to remember from this distortion the most is that, yeah, it's great that Nichole can work on her perfectionism, but I can't do that. Yeah, it's great that that guy could wear that mohawk and look good in it, but I can't do that. This is where we discount the positive that's happening. So you notice it, right? Like you notice that there's a positive attribute. You notice that you received a compliment, then you dismiss it entirely. This is your boss coming to you and saying, you did a great job today. And then you looking at your coworker and going like, yeah, he's just saying that because we're understaffed. And, I put a little bit more effort into the staff report. What? No. Typically, people aren't going out of their way all the time. I don't want to overgeneralize this, but typically people aren't going out of their way all of the time to compliment you on something. Perfectionists have a really hard time too of sitting with a compliment and sitting with positive notions of themselves and the way that they're showing up. We don't love it. And sometimes it makes us feel really, really uncomfortable. And what ends up happening is that we never really feel the positivity or the celebration that can exist with what this person is trying to say to us. This relates a lot to celebrations and also this other distortion that's called mental filtering, right? Which is where we only take in the bits and pieces of information that we want to hear and we kind of just disregard everything else. It's a different distortion for a different webinar, but it's very similar in that way. We don't accept the compliments, we don't accept the values, we don't accept the positives that anybody is saying to us. And a lot of the times this is that really elevated monger again, right? This is that monger that's constantly saying like, you didn't do well enough. If I left every presentation that I've ever done, and even when they've not been perfect or they've not gone the way that I wanted them to go, and I just criticized myself and discounted all of the positive that existed inside and outside of that container, I wouldn't want to keep showing up on webinars. And this is where we get ourselves stuck in this distortion. It's like going to the gym, right? You go to the gym, you do the same workout all the time, you're over it, you're kind of at that point where like, I'm just plateauing, like I don't feel like I'm excelling in any way, I'm not getting the results that I want. And instead of you even asking for help or asking for consideration or asking for some support from anybody, you're literally just looking at it like, forget it. I'm just not going to do this. I'm not going to keep doing this. I'm going to give you the mental shifts here too. These are a little bit longer. Also, this one includes some additional details in it. So, take what you want. Sometimes we're not ready to hear or acknowledge the positives, and there's nothing wrong with that. But at some point, it can be really helpful to sit down and make a pros and cons list or talk it out with someone you trust where you can come into acknowledgement that these dark thinking patterns are not helpful. I want you to think of one of the best things that you've ever done for yourself that was a huge accomplishment for you. Did you feel it? Or did you fly right past it? This is oftentimes where that high functioning anxiety starts to come out. It's where that imposter syndrome starts to exist from. This discounting the positive is also a pretty significant trauma response a lot of the times from when we're growing up and the ways in which our parents set high expectations of us or don't give us a lot of positive reinforcement, right? When we're constantly moving that needle, we're never able to actually fully experience a compliment. And what has to happen is that we have to start being more positive with ourselves. We have to start sitting in this notion that says, hey, like it is actually okay for me to have some acceptance and be really excited about something that's happened. I know I've said this before in another presentation, but I have two amazing sister-in-laws. And whenever I have something really cool and happy happen, I always reach out to them and I'm like, guess what? And we just have this cheerleader moment for a second. And they do it with me too. They're like, guess what happened? And like having that external validation, having that moment, having that like just that camaraderie helps me to amplify that positive. I added another piece in here. I'm going to read it and then we're going to go through all of them. I just want to add in here, when we're grieving or suffering from excessive loss, this can be very, very, very hard to get past. It takes a lot of time and energy to begin shifting and thinking and working on improving the way in which we are maintaining our perspective. Find your source, find your support person who will sit with you and will just let you be angry and sad and mad all at the same time. Or reach out to a therapist or coach for specific support with this one. You're welcome to reach out to me if you feel like you need additional support with that one. Grief adds an additional layer onto this. And it doesn't have to be that you're grieving somebody. It can be that you're grieving the loss of a job, a transition in your life, your life in a way that you didn't expect it to go, right? The grief that surrounds us a lot of the times leads to this distortion of discounting the positive because it's really hard to see happy when we are very sad and depressed with things that have been going on. A lot of the times too, we're not looking for that person to be super positive Polly around us. We're looking for that person that'll literally sit there with us in that space. Some of you guys know this, but I don't know if everybody knows this. During COVID, I worked for hospice, and it was sad. I kind of felt useless a lot of the times in that job, and I leaned into all these distortions all the time. And I got a good evaluation on a loss that I had, one of the first deaths that I had when I was working at hospice. And I was primarily facility and hospital based, which meant I had to go to the facility or the hospital to be with the patient. Our hospice also has home care, like in-home care, but I wasn't on that team very often. And so I showed up for this passing of this client, this patient, and I didn't feel like I was doing anything. So I said to the family, I wanted to give the family their space. And I said, hey guys, like I'm here for you. I'm going to stay until, the morgue comes. I'll be right here. The funeral home comes. I'll be right here. I'm going to sit at the nurse's station. And one of the, I don't know if it was the brother, the uncle, or whoever, the family member came over and he just stood next to me at the nurse's station. And I could kind of pick up that he was very uncomfortable with where he was at. And so I came around the nurse's station. I sat with him on this little bench area and we didn't say a word. We just sat there. We just sat together. He needed that space and he needed somebody to just sit with him in that space. Well, my supervisor ended up getting a really good review and she pulled me into her office and she said, what happened during this loss? And I said, nothing. Like nothing atypical, right? Like I did all the paperwork and I sat with family and supported them. And they wrote this glowing review. It wasn't about anything that I said in that moment. And as a partner, this is such a valuable, valuable asset, you guys. It wasn't about anything that I said. It was about me just sharing space with that person for the few minutes that got me this really, really nice review. And it took me a while to really recognize and acknowledge the positive that came out of that. But what that taught me and what that gave me was that not everything has a response. When we're grieving, we start to discount every positive. We seek light. We seek somebody that looks different. I can be a huge trigger to somebody that had a traumatic loss within hospice if they see me, right? But this guy, I'm pretty sure if he saw me again and recognized me again, it may bring him comfort because I was what he sought during that experience. He found, oh, you're welcome. He found something in that moment with me to be able to share that positive moment, to be able to go, you know what, like this girl's doing, she's going to make sure everything's okay. And it was perfect, right? The way that it played out, and I don't like saying that a lot of times, but it was actually perfect how it worked out. It was very smooth. They don't all go like not every situation goes like that, but really pay attention to when something really good happens, how can you begin to honor that? I didn't really recognize how positive, like how much positive actually came out of that until probably a year after that had happened. And like to really experience the amplification of how powerful that was for somebody. So I have a disclaimer I want to talk about. You got to learn about 5 distortions. There's actually a lot more distortions than just 5. And this can be really helpful for the way that you are showing up within your relationship, that you are starting to show up within your life. But I do not want you to walk away from here thinking, I should do everything perfect from here on out. I should never engage in these distortions. That is not how this work works. It's not. I want you to be really, really cognizant that this stuff takes a lot of time and people are in therapy for a long time. This is a big part of like what CBT, what we do in CBT is breaking cognitive distortions, understanding core beliefs. Holding yourself to this expectation that you're going to just be able to overcome these all the time is not what's going to be helpful. If you and your partner are sitting there right now, you need to literally look at your partner or be with yourself for a second and come into this agreement that you're going to work on them, but it's not going to be achieved quickly. It's going to be something that you're going to be willing to put some time and energy and effort into. It's going to be something that the two of you can either come together on and really come to access and learn and understand from each other to help start breaking them. But I do not want you to walk away from here with this expectation that all of a sudden you should just know and understand these and never engage in them again. That would be you engaging in another cognitive distortion. I couldn't be more punny or literal at this point. I'm not sure. Take your time, okay? I do have, oh, cool, there's a question. What is the best way to have awareness when you are feeling one of these distortions? Yeah, call it out. Remember I kind of mentioned the journaling thing and the one distortion? Call it out immediately. Call out what the distortion is very quickly. I do this with myself all the time. I'll say like, oh, you're shitting yourself, Nick. Like you shouldn't get yourself into this place. But a lot of the times it looks like, okay, I think my list needs to be this. I probably should lower this in some way. And the only way that I'm going to start to really come away from this distortion is by first calling it out, and by second, coming up with an alternative approach. You guys, I can't express to you enough too that sometimes and perfectionists are really, really guilty of this, but sometimes when we have a problem, we turn it into this really big mountain of an issue. And we think that the only right thing to do is solve it as quickly as possible. But if you could step back and give it a little bit of time and start to recognize like, hey, I want to take some space with this and really come into acknowledge what it is that I want or how I want to resolve this, you're going to collect more data. You're going to understand alternatives. It's going to add additional resources into what you're trying to solve. And the problem may solve itself, by the way. Take your time. Bring it into awareness, call it out, pull on your supports, work with your ally, communicate with your partner, and then start making small pivots and shifts back to ways that you can support yourself. Cool. I do have a favor that I'd love to ask you guys. I put together a questionnaire, and this could be the only webinar you've attended, or it could be the 4 out of 4 that you've attended. But I would love for you to fill this out. This is really going to help me with designing, choosing, and moving forward with doing live webinars in the future. It's only going to take you a couple minutes, but it would be really, really helpful for me to know how you liked it, how you liked the presentation, if there's any other topics that you're interested in the future. I would so appreciate any feedback on that. I'm also open for questions. Thank you guys so much for coming tonight. Please, if you can, fill out that little survey for me. Also, if you are interested in booking a strategy call, it's an hour with me. It's free. Why not? There's no obligation required. I am both selling my course as well as enrolling for group coaching right now. And it is a very small group that I select. So I would love to chat with you. I'd love to get to know you a little bit more and telling you about the opportunities that can exist within that space. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming tonight. I will let you know when I pick up to do the next series. And if you have any requests for any other topics, please let me know, because that really helps me with narrowing down what to talk about next.